Quick notice before the show. This podcast was recorded in November of 2022. Enjoy.
The companies, that are doing the best, that I guess subconsciously we would like to spend more time with, you don't, because they don't need you. They don't need your help.
Yeah.
It's usually, the companies that are struggling that you spend the most time with. And I feel like that's, again, where the difference comes between good and great investors.
Miguel, welcome to Brazil.
Well, thank you for having me.
How long are you in town for?
So I just came this morning, fresh off the plane. And this time, as you know, I usually come quick in and out as I try to make this efficient and be back home with the wife and the kids. But this time around, for my standards, I'm staying a whole week.
A few days in Sao Paulo, then off to Rio.
That's right. I'm going to be in Sao Paulo until Friday. And then Friday heading to Rio for the weekend for one of our portfolio founders' weddings.
Awesome. Before we get into your story, we've got this BFF in the background here, which is a project you and I have been working on for the last year or so. Do you want to quickly give the background on what is BFF?
Sure. So I'm going to try to make this brief. The whole backstory from it, I guess it's been coming over the years, just from our backgrounds as being entrepreneurs, then turned investors, and just what we think that it's a very overused word because a lot of people think like, disrupting VC, bringing new platforms. I hate the word platform. But the way I see it, it's more of a personal journey. It's like an evolution of myself, as an operator, an investor, meeting you, feeling like we're aligned, how we want to invest, how we want to support founders. The way we see it aligned, and really just a combination of it, is BFF, which is obviously a wordplay. It stands for by founders, for founders. It's something that I'm going to give credit to my friend back in New York, Sebastian, who helped me come up with it. But really the essence of it is that I'm a former founder, you're still a founder yourself. And we feel that there's an opportunity here in Latin America. There's tons of amazing local investors that we love collaborating with. But as the ecosystem is growing here, I feel like there's definitely room for more very early stage focused funds that have operational experience themselves and can bring that empathy to the table, helping founders, go from 0 to 1 in the very early days where a lot of shit happens.
Yep. I want to get into how we think about investing in founders, how we think about helping founders. But let's get into a bit of your life's journey up until this point. You're born in Switzerland?
That's correct. I was born in Zurich, Switzerland, to a Colombian mother and a Swiss dad. So I have this interesting mix of European that is sought out more as the colder kind of people, and then the Colombian being more like the fierce, passionate side. I like to believe
it's a great way to describe the Colombians. We both know folks from the quote unquote rappy mafia, and the way that I would describe every person that I know who ever worked at Rappi is fierce.
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of their DNA and it's part of their success stories. I think credit to the founders, at Rappi that have created that Rappi Mafia. Well, now rebranded to Rappi Mafia, as they've been calling it.
That's the Spanish term for mafia?
No, not at all. It's a Spanish term for magic.
Ah, I like that.
So I've been hearing that lately a bit more. I don't know if they're officially doing rebranding within their group, but that's what I've been hearing more and more. And yeah, I think it's a testament mostly to the founders having instilled that culture in Rappi, and also credit to them for really being super supportive of their early employees and really fostering that entrepreneurship and encouraging people who are thinking about starting their own business, supporting them and getting them going and introducing them to investors, started helping them think about the strategy and really supporting them.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the Rappi Mafia for a bit, because That company started roughly 6 years ago. Is that right? 5 or 6 years ago?
Don't quote me on it, but I would say 6, 7 years ago. I think it was like 2015, 2016, something like that.
Not that long ago. They were definitely not like the first wave of founders here in Latin America doing technology startups, but the pace at which they scaled the business, and then what's become of that, and you've got all of these other startups in the ecosystem now that are former Rappi people, and that's why they call it the Rappi Mafia. But it's pretty incredible what's happened over the last few years with that group of people.
Yeah, no, like I said, got to give them lots of credit. I think the last numbers were that they've churned out over 80 or even 100 founders that are coming out of that ecosystem. And as a Colombian, of course, it makes me really proud because we're certainly not the biggest, market or country in the region. It's obviously Brazil being clear number one, then Mexico, and then you have Colombia's number three. But if you look at the numbers, Mexico and Brazil are something like 80% of the GDP. And Colombia right there with it. But yeah, they're definitely been punching way above their weight when it comes to the size of the country, to the number of innovative companies and founders that have been able to churn out. At the same time, I will as well, though, I feel like I would not be doing my job if I'd be honest about, is that as much as I respect at the pace that they've been creating companies and really fostering that culture, at the same time, I also see a little bit of question around that model, as it's the growth at all costs that I feel has been pushed a little bit too much to recent years, and not just Colombia or the region. I mean,
everybody.
And I would say
until 5 months ago when the market crashed.
And I feel like the US has been even more at fault for that. And I don't consider myself old. I'm 35, and I've really only, if I'm honest, having graduated from college in 2010, I'm part of that generation that's only seen a bull market.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I've considered myself very fortunate, having had a lot of great mentors to learn from on the operational side and also on the investing side. And those conversations are ringing very true now. I've always saying, you've never gone through a downturn. It's always been up. Like, it will come eventually. But being the sixth generation in my family business that is very traditional in CPG, my grandfather being one of my, if not the mentor growing up, has always taught us to build companies thoughtful, with a healthy balance sheet. But more importantly, when it comes to culture, really paying attention to how you're building your team. He would always say you're only as strong as your weakest link. And at the same time, everyone within your team, from the bottom to the top, has to know exactly what they're working towards and what they're believing in. That's sort of how I was raised, and also how businesses should be built. Crazy enough, my first business, Elite Daily, by the time we sold, we had only raised $2.5 million. Granted, the kind of business model that it was, it allowed us to make advertising revenue from day zero. So there was some alleviation from that, not having to raise too much money. But at the same time, I'm really thankful with my partners in that business. We were always very aligned, trying to be growing at a thoughtful pace and not just at all costs. And if I'm honest, we also never really had the choice because media wasn't hot at the time, and we were definitely
You and I
not.
both started digital media businesses, and why they can be very sexy, and you can reach a lot of people. I think in your guys' case, you got to 75 million monthly active users or readers, consumers, however you want to put that. We got to 25 million. But raising venture capital dollars on the back of a media business is almost impossible for most people. It was challenging for us. We raised a couple $1 million over the years from high net worth individuals and things like that, but we're never attractive to the venture capital firms.
Yeah, I have to be honest with myself and say, like, we definitely were fortunate, but I guess timing is everything, as you also learn over time. Like, two things that I'm a very big believer in is timing is everything, and also that you create your own luck. Those are two drivers that I always believe in very much, and I've been fortunate enough to live it myself. But to the first one, I think we were also fortunate that when we started Elite Daily, it was also a new golden era in media. You had Huffington Post, that was a good success story. You had BuzzFeed that was growing very fast at the time and creating real revenue. Bleacher Reporter, which we know the founders very well. One of them, Dave Nemitz, was actually one of our early investors.
Yeah, Brian Goldberg was our first investor. Small, so the digital media community is a small world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we definitely also benefited from that, and then of course Facebook coming in and being the kingmaker and the fire hose, but then of course also killing that in 2015, which then also killed a lot of the businesses. So I would say in hindsight, I would like to claim that we knew exactly what was coming and we timed the sale of our business perfectly. But yeah, that's not true. Like I would again believe that we created our own luck, but we also got lucky to sell at the right time.
Let's go back to the family business. You said you're sixth generation entrepreneur in your family. Tell me that story.
Yeah, admittedly, I don't love talking about it too much just because, again, for my grandfather, the way we were raised is being humble is number one. So I guess the family also just likes to stay in the background. But yeah, it started many years ago in CPG. The first was tobacco. And today, there's also chocolate. Those are the owned and operated brands where we own the whole supply chain. In tobacco, we actually also grow on tobacco here in Brazil, in Bahia. Chocolate, don't grow ourselves where we buy the raw materials, but from there on, own factories, own distribution, everything owned and operated as well. And then, of course, as it goes over time, family businesses evolve, get some diversification, strategic investments, all the different types of investments. But like I was saying before, I worked when I was young in the family business. So by the time I graduated high school, I had already worked through the whole supply chain, meaning I've worked on a plantation, in the factory, wholesale, retail. And looking back, I think that was great. And again, it was instilled in me by, my grandfather, my father, just the family's philosophy that you got to stay humble and you got to work every bits and parts of your business in order to be able to really appreciate, your own business and everybody that works at your business. So I think that was definitely informative. But once I graduated high school, left Switzerland, came to the US, started my career in investment banking, and I've been ever since, in tech. So I've not really been as involved with the family business.
Cool. So back to Elite Daily. When did you guys start Elite Daily?
So one thing I always like to highlight as well, I consider myself founding team and not a co-founder, just out of respect of David and Jonathan, who are the true co-founders. So I was introduced to David and Jonathan as they were still finishing university in late 2011, early 2012. Elite Daily officially was incorporated in late 2011, but I didn't join full-time until early 2012 as part of the founding team, where it was David, Jonathan's little brother, one of his close friends, and me. So that was like the founding team when it really got going.
Cool. And that was that an overnight success?
You know how it goes with overnight successes. You might hit your stride and your product market fit and grow really fast, but I feel like as everybody who's been called an overnight success, they would all tell you there was a lot of work and long nights leading up to that.
Yeah, what's like the one-line pitch for Elite Daily at the time when you guys were getting started? What were you presenting to investors?
Well, we weren't really presenting to investors because until we started hitting our numbers, nobody was really interested in us. But our pitch to our readers and users was, and it's really David's brainchild, he really came up with it, was that he wanted to be the one platform that millennials could come to and could find anything across the board that they might be interested in. He was saying, if you come and you want to read, about sex and relationships, you should be able to find something there. If you want to find something about entertainment or sports or even news, but we gave it our own spin. And we definitely never claimed, to go against, the big New York Times, Washington Post, and so on. Like we didn't have those kind of, journalistic writers.
But at the time, though, the bigger publications were, I guess, if you're a 20, 25-year-old millennial, that content, that news content was presented in a kind of a boring way. And that's where you guys could come in and...
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was really one of our differentiators as well, that we were our own audience. All our writers were in their early 20s as well. So a lot of times the writers, they would just write about their own experiences and just make it really authentic that way. And our goal was always that when we push out a piece of content, our friends or other people might read it and think like, oh, wow, this really speaks to me. And like, that's me. Like I can see myself in that article and that experience. And like for us, it was all about the authenticity. Like we always wanted to be, the voice of Generation Y. That was our tagline.
How did you guys go from 0 to 75 million people a month visiting the website?
Well, as we were just saying before, obviously that didn't happen overnight. I always give a lot of credit to David and his team. I guess in our company, the content was the product. So he was the product owner. And he ran a very tight ship with his editorial team. He always made sure that even though we were a very young workforce, everybody was really focused when it mattered. And that was also a very big part of our culture. Like it was, when it mattered, we would all go all in and really believe in it and work day and night. And when the time was right, we would also all have a great time together, have a couple of beers together, enjoy ourselves, and like generally have strong friendships. I mean, still until today, one of the, I would say, prides of Elite Daily for me, of the legacy, is that a lot of the early employees or even later employees are still really close friends. I still see on social media people following me following them having gatherings, weddings, where a good number of the attendees at the wedding are former Elite Daily employees. That's something that I'm super proud about and really excited. And I think that was a really big driver of, being able to create the content at a good pace, but also always, even as we were scaling, keeping it very authentic and very clear for everyone within Elite Daily what the North Star was, what we're working towards, and therefore allowing us to scale in a strategic way and also being able to repeat it, that scalability.
So David was running the editorial operations. You were running more of the commercial side of the business?
Yeah. So it was David, the product owner and CEO, me being the president and commercial lead, so meaning mostly sales, and then finance, and then operations I would share with Jonathan, where Jonathan was sort of like the healthy middle between David and myself. Like he also helped out in product, he helped out in operations. And that was a great thing that I didn't really appreciate at the time. But a lot of our investors and friends would always say like, guys, you're one of the best humming, trio team that we know. And for us, it was just so natural and we just took it for granted. But looking back, we definitely should have appreciated those moments a little bit more where we were just seamlessly very complementary to each other and working really well. And the most important thing is also that we'll always say no ego. We had zero ego amongst us and the partnership. And also with the management team, it was really all about what's best.
You guys were young guys. How old were you?
I was 23. And David and Jonathan. So Jonathan is the same age as me, so I guess he was 23 as well. David is a bit younger. I want to say he was 20, 21.
Yeah, because you guys got to big scale, which means your job as part of running the commercial team, I assume, was meeting with big advertisers and ad agencies in New York City. As like a 23, 24-year-old, that must be pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you know how it goes, like youthfulness is also like the ignorance of youthfulness is also a blessing. We were just growing, so we got the attention. We started getting the meetings and we just went into these meetings, and looking back, sometimes maybe, a little bit arrogant. I don't know.
What was the pitch at the time?
Our pitch was just like, hey, here's
the millennials are here.
Let us walk you through the different verticals that we have. Let us show you the numbers. I mean, the one thing that I think we did have going for ourselves is that we were also analytical from a pretty early stage. My couple of years in investment banking definitely helped me a lot thinking strategic and process oriented and looking at the numbers, making sure we're collecting the right KPIs. And then we, of course, was also a learning experience, as in the first couple of meetings, we would walk in and we would show what we thought was the important metrics. And the media buyers would ask us for all these different type of metrics that, are sort of standard for the industry. So yeah, we learned quick, iterated, and then we knew sort of what is the things that they want. And then of course, you're trying to give them sort of like that differentiation that others are not giving, speaking about our culture, our voice and tone, our access to what millennials care about because it's us, they're for us, by us model. And
seems
that's
like
really
a recurring theme here.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that was working well for us. Is the better we were becoming, the more, strategy we were thinking about how we pitch the brand. And then also, of course, productizing, thinking about the different products, editorial, video, co-branding. Yeah, we ended up doing some amazing campaigns that I think came out pretty cool with partners like SFX at the time, that were the operator of most of the electronic music festivals, with some of the guys there, Joe mainly. We built an awesome partnership that we then went and co-sold it to T-Mobile, for example. We sold a whole global campaign to them, where we actually here in Brazil as well, was like Tomorrowland Brazil, Tomorrowland in Belgium, Tomorrow World in Atlanta. And we did this whole global campaign that we created this video journey for T-Mobile.
How did that lead to ultimately the acquisition from Daily Mail?
Yeah, so again, I guess we were a little bit arrogant at the time because we were growing very fast. We were in the middle of raising a Series A, and we were negotiating terms with a potential lead. We're pretty far along. And then John Steinberg, who was the president of BuzzFeed, had just left BuzzFeed and became the CEO of North America at Daily Mail.
I don't know John, but that guy's a beast.
Oh, yeah, John, I would always joke, he's like the Energizer Bunny. He would always be full of energy no matter what time of the day. And it was like, so what's going on? What else is going? What kind of deals are happening? And like, he would just... definitely learned a lot from him as well. And just, yeah, he's...
Yeah, when I was building Torcedores, there was a few figures in the digital media space that I looked up to and would watch all of their interviews and content to try and learn from them. He was one of them.
Yeah, no, he's definitely a force. And, obviously very successful. After leaving Daily Mail, he started Cheddar, which he's already sold as well for a couple $100 million.
Wow.
And now he's figuring out what he wants to do next. I was actually just hanging out with him the other week. But yeah, still consider him a mentor and someone that I've definitely enjoyed working with. But to answer your question, as he became the CEO of Daily Mail, he looked at our traffic and our user base and how we were selling. And he felt that Daily Mail and Elite Daily could be very complementary brands to being co-sold together. So he became our champion within Daily Mail, and then invited us to come to London, where Daily Mail's headquarters is, to meet the chairman, who's the owner of Daily Mail, and had a couple of nice meetings. Then came back to New York, and he asked us, and that's one thing I was really appreciative about John as well. He's a very straight shooter, no bullshit. And he just outright not playing games like, I'm super interested. What would be the number, that would excite you? And of course, you're like, well, we're raising a Series A around this kind of valuation. So it should definitely be more than that.
So it's like the Instagram, Facebook negotiation.
So we just gave him a big number. And of course, he said, you guys are crazy. And then ironically, I was then speaking to other friends who said, keep in mind, you guys only raised $2.5 million. You guys comparatively still own, a good piece of the cap table.
Yeah.
If you go and raise a Series A, you're undoubtedly going to have to go raise a Series B. So there's 2 rounds of dilution right there. And then I guess...
so the exit number needs to be 3 times higher.
And then sort of like the former banker in me, I created a waterfall analysis and started thinking like, okay, what would be the dilution be? How much would you have to sell? And then the numbers ended up becoming pretty big. And I was like, if you're realistic, look at the data. How many media companies have sold for more than, let's say, 250 million? Very few.
Very few.
So,
HuffPost and... Bleach Report was like 175, I think.
No, I think there were 250. if I remember correct. But long story short, with David and Jonathan, we sat around the table, we talked to our boards, and we said, guys, actually, this might not be terrible. So went back to the negotiation table, and we figured out something that we thought that was fair for everybody else, all in 50 million. And then we pushed it through. And it was definitely interesting because definitely some tension internally with the board as well. There were some board members who felt that we shouldn't sell, that felt that, there's still more to get out of. And yeah, thankful to some of our institutional investors who were unfortunately not on the board, but were super supportive. They helped us push this through. And I like to believe that all of those investors who were against that sale, now in hindsight, I'm sure they're pretty happy about it.
Yeah, you're now on the other side of the table as an investor. If that was your portfolio company today, and the founders have an opportunity to make real money, maybe your multiple on that investment is not going to be 100x, but how would you advise a founder today in that situation?
I always think there's a very fine line between, being founder friendly. So a lot of the funds over the last couple of years would tout themselves as being super founder friendly and always letting the founders do. And I think in some cases we've seen how that can, massively backfire. I think there definitely needs to be a checks and balance. And I think governance is very important. And it's funny how a lot of, I think, governance basics just were thrown out the window. And I think we've seen that if you could take that too far to an extreme is not healthy either. But at the same time, I also really believe that you need to trust your founders. When you invest into a company, especially at the early stages as we are, you really mostly invest into the people. So if you get to a point where you believe that they're not the right founders for the business anymore, you also have to look in the mirror and say that you did a mistake as well. So because of that, to answer your question.
But businesses can also outgrow their founders, right?
But I like to believe that the reasonable founders, because they're all not idiots. They're all pretty smart people. They've all, have certain traits for being able to get the company to a certain level where you can even have this conversation. Mm-hmm. 90% of businesses die before you can even have this, champagne problem.
Exactly.
So I like to believe that if they're reasonable founders, you can probably have a conversation with them and see how feel it out. But again, that's where I feel like the difference, what I've seen from some of my, mentors who are GPs at other funds, I feel like that's the difference between a good and a great investor. I think having that empathy, that EQ, and it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it and how you approach it. But I do want to go back and answer your question. I think if we were in a situation like that, I would always tell the founders, and I still try to do it in general. I always give my advice. Like I always say to founders, look, this is how I see it. This is my advice. Take it or leave it. Mm-hmm. But trying to force founders into making a decision 9 out of 10 times, it doesn't end well. Even if you're right, they're going to resent you for it after.
Yeah, the relationships, it maybe not going to be broken fully, but it's not going to help the relationship at all.
Yeah. And look, of course, sometimes if a founder does something, really extreme and you have to, figure out a solution and, maybe find another better person to take over, that's a different story. But that's what you have, again, governance in place for. That's what you sign agreements with, when you invest, if it's either a safe or if it's a price round. And so I think those things are pretty clear if you do something that is really unethical or illegal. But in these kind of cases where it's really very subjective, where it's just, I see it A, you see it B.
You have interest, I have interest.
Yeah.
Those might not be aligned all the time.
It might not be great for me if I believe that the company can still grow a lot and, there's more to come out. But at the end of the day, I think people always have to remember that for an investor, this is one of multiple companies that you invested in, and you put in a certain percentage of your, day, week, month, year into that business. For the founders, is they put their whole career, their life into this, and that's what they think about 24/7. So I think you owe their respect to the founders that if they believe that they took the company to a good place and they got rewarded with an offer to being acquired. If that's what they want to do and they want to take it, then they should have the right to do that.
After Lead Daily, retired?
No, fortunately, we didn't sell for enough.
What did you do after that?
I guess like most, you fall into a little bit of a soul-searching hole. I mean, I had my 2-year earnout after we sold, but when I left the earnout,
you stayed on and worked with John for a little bit?
Yes. Unfortunately, he left after the first year. So the second year, I wasn't working with John anymore. But yeah, I stayed 2 years. And then when I left, it was a little bit of soul searching, like, for the first time in many years, not having to think about the business and just having, suddenly you have so much time. Like, what do you do with it? The classic thing people tell you, like, I just take a mental break, speak with people, go, around, read, do all the things you didn't have time for. I definitely took advantage of that. I also went traveling. I went with my little brother and some friends, to soccer games in London to see Arsenal that I support, that I haven't been able to do something like that for a while. I went skiing, and I did a couple of these things. And my first son was also just born shortly before my earnout finished. So I took advantage of that as well. After Christmas, stayed a little bit longer in Switzerland with my mother, and with my son. Like things like that, you just otherwise can't take advantage of. And then started thinking sort of, what do I want to do next? What want to read myself into? As it goes, one conversation leads to another. But one thing I would definitely say is that it's completely normal to fall into a little bit of a mental hole. Don't ignore it. Address it if you have to with help. I also had a therapist that I saw for quite a while, that I started seeing while at Elite Daily. Mm-hmm. So my wife, she's a doctor in psychology. And the one thing I love about it is that as well is that I never feel analyzed by her. I never feel imposed, but every once in a while she says like, for XYZ reason, I think maybe you should think about it that way. She could definitely feel that I was getting close to a burnout. So she recommended me seeing a therapist. I would have never thought about it if she wouldn't have told me. And honestly, it was great. It was just great to be able to speak to someone that is completely away from your business, from your family, and there's like a neutral person. And that helped me a lot. And of course, that person also helped me after, the earnout finished. So my recommendation to anyone is definitely don't bury it.
Look, therapy for me, for most of my life, was a taboo topic. Maybe the way that kind of the environment that I grew up in. And when I left Torcedores, my first company 5 years ago or so, I was feeling like the worst human on the planet, like no confidence, had a bit of a falling out with a couple of my partners, didn't know what I wanted to do next, and was in that mental rut for quite a while. And I came to a breaking point that forced me to have conversations with a couple of my close friends. And they said, maybe you should do therapy or coaching or something like that. And then I found a therapist. 3 months later, I would say my life was totally turned around and changed. And I was, seeing the positive in life and in the future again. I'm a huge advocate now for therapy, for coaching, for anything that can give you an advantage in life, I think is...
Yeah, it's really about getting an edge. I mean, it's totally fine talking about, everybody who says to be able to be a high-performing CEO or founder or executive, you got to be mentally really fit, you got to be physically really fit. So if you meet someone and they say, I go run every morning at 5 a.m., and they look like they're really in shape, they get applauded for it. Yeah. Same way you go train your body, you should also just go train your mind.
So you do some therapy. When did you start?
Well, admittedly, unfortunately, I'm not seeing the therapist anymore since a while.
That's fine.
But it was mutual. We felt that we had done the work that we had to.
Yeah, I don't think therapy necessarily needs to be a lifelong pursuit. For me anyway, it kind of ebbs and flows. And so when I feel like I need therapy, then I seek my therapist and we might have a couple sessions and resolve some things. Much more of what I do try and make consistent in my life is coaching. So I have an executive coach, Lynn Waldera. She's amazing. She works with me in my executive team. My brother, he started coaching recently, so I've been working with him, and him and I are kind of life coaches for each other in a way as well. And that's been super valuable to my life. So, but anyway, back to your story. You sold Elite Daily. You did your earn out there. At what point did you start? Was it brand commerce?
Yeah. So after that, I met my co-founder, Killian, who's European as well, who he was already working on ideating around brand commerce. We had spent a bunch of time together, getting to know each other, and we felt like, we could do something together. So I joined him as a co-founder of brand commerce. It was just the two of us. And really the idea behind brand commerce was that, and it was something that was stemming out of sort of, already from my Elite Daily days, that not just Elite Daily, any publisher really has the issue that giving attribution at the bottom of the funnel, true attribution being actually to know if you do a Coca-Cola ad, like who actually went and bought, a Coca-Cola. Mm-hmm. And he was coming from a different angle from his previous company, but we thought that there could be a really interesting solution where you can be the middle layer API to be able to help these kind of CPG brands becoming D2C brands, but without having completely uphand how they've been operating for the previous 100 years. Of course, they have like the partnerships in place with the wholesalers and the distribution channels that they have. And of course, it's a fine line where you have to make sure that you're not going to piss them off either. So our pitch was that with our middle layer API and being able to get SKU level information from mom and pop shops, you could turn all these mom and pop shops into micro warehouses, and the transaction is still running through them. So everyone within, the process they've been used to wins, because you go, let's say on a Coca-Cola website, of course, a bottle in itself, the unit economics don't add up for you to then go and fulfill it, having it delivered. That just doesn't make sense. You look at all these, 15-minute delivery grocery stores and models, and I think, they keep proving that they're just money-burning machines. So the way we thought about it is, don't reinvent the wheel, just allow them to work together so that you can have your Coca-Cola website, you collect the PII because it went through you, but then you get pushed into wherever the nearest product is for you and is being fulfilled by a third-party, 3PL that you can partner with, or an Uber Eats in the US that was doing these kind of deliveries as well. Grew that business to, about $1.5 million ARR. But then admittedly also started realizing that there's some limitations to the model. And so we started thinking about also, okay, can we actually apply this in Europe as well, both of us being European? And Molson Coors was one of our large customers at the time, and they pushed us to go to the UK. So the main, value proposition of the solution is being able for them to get PII data.
What is PII data?
It's like personal identifiable information. So really being able to know you are Derek Hall.
Basically, because these big CPG brands, they're spending billions of dollars a year advertising, marketing to
but they don't
the
know
world,
who their customers are.
But they don't actually know what the true ROI on all of that.
Yeah, no, exactly. They don't truly know who their customers are, which is kind of insane in today's age. And then of course they have to go through platforms like Amazon, for example, where it's like you're just feeding the Amazon machine. They have all this information. And the beauty of Amazon is that if you're a big brand and you work with Amazon, they make you pay extra fees if you want to get that personal information. So it's like you pay them to use their service, and then on top of it,
pay them to know who your customer is.
Exactly, yeah. Which is, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I guess there's a reason why Jeff Bezos is the richest man, and AWS, which a lot of people always tend to forget that that's the vast majority of their revenue. And that also allows them to do Prime, Amazon Prime and everything else that is subsidized. But back to your question. So when we started looking at creating a solution, brand commerce in the UK, that was in the early days in 2017, where GDPR was in discussion and it was being signed into law, but it wasn't in effect yet. But because the value proposition of us being able to collect PII, most of course, one of the main things is like, hey, can you please make sure that you're compliant with the new privacy regulations? And as we started looking into that, and generally being a Swiss and Killian being Irish, we were always fascinated by the fact that data privacy was just never a big topic in the US in general. Like nobody really cared much about it. Versus in Europe, it's a human right. And as we started looking into it, and we started to go, there's got to be, like what Stripe did for payment processing, there's got to be that for data privacy. There was nothing out there, and all the so-called technology solutions were really just lawyers and consultants masking themselves as a technology solution, but selling very manual solutions. So as we started looking more into it, we thought, okay, this is an interesting opportunity. Started building the solution for ourselves, and then people started asking us more and more about that and how we can streamline privacy compliance. And one thing led to another where we realized, okay, actually, this is a really exciting opportunity. Maybe we should pursue that. And that's then when we pivoted from brand commerce to Ethyca.
And what was Ethyca? What is Ethyca?
So Ethyca, when we first started, as I was just saying before, is like we felt that privacy regulation is the one regulation that stems, the issue stems out of technology. Therefore, it should also be solved through technology. So we wanted to be able to create developer tools to make it as seamless as possible for engineering organizations to keep focusing on what they want to do, building the core product, and not having to be clashing with the legal either outside counsels or legal inside teams when they're telling them, hey, you can't, operate exactly the way you want anymore because we need to be GDPR compliant with your company, that is handling EU, residents' personal information, or CCPA in the US. And as we started looking into it, we started thinking, okay, there's ways that you should be able to create developer tools to seamlessly integrate yourself into these engineering organizations and being able to help them automating privacy compliance.
You are not at Ethyca anymore.
No, that is correct. I left the day-to-day business of Ethyca in late 2020.
You ended up leaving Ethyca, 2.5, 3 years in?
Yeah. So if you take the whole journey with brand commerce and Ethyca combined, that was about 3.5 years. Yeah.
You guys raised a bunch of money.
Great investors. Great investors. We had Founder Collective and Aya Ventures sort of co-lead the seed round. And then we had Lee Fixel from Edition, Preempt, the Series A, had Max Levchin from Sci-Fi come in as well, Lucky Groom as well, like a bunch of, great investors, which admittedly, I actually don't know all of them personally, as like some investors came in through me and some came through Killian.
Killian was the CEO.
He's my co-founder, the CEO of Ethyca, yeah. And yeah, I'm sure your next question is going to be, like what happened? Why am I not there anymore?
Yeah. And these are important stories to tell because most co-founding relationships, they don't always work out. Most of them don't actually work out. They're extremely complex, complicated relationships. You're spending 24/7 with this person. They might have one vision. You might have another vision. Your skill sets are different than their skill sets. And getting fully aligned. I mean, we just met with a couple of co-founders. We're not going to mention their name. And one of them, co-founded another business 2.5, 3 years ago, has already left, has already departed from that one and is on to the next one with a new co-founder. So these types of things happen all the time.
Yeah, no, 100%. Look, as I was saying earlier, I was very spoiled in the first business because it just worked perfect. And like I said before, we didn't appreciate it as much at the time, how well it was working. And the second time around, I guess it's like, relationships, marriages, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. I don't think that needs to be like, there's not always like this big, juicy, story behind that media would love to like drool over, It's like, I think I would say the one thing, that Killian and I, we always had going for ourselves is like that. I like to believe we're both, mature people and we're always able to have these difficult conversations. So we it wasn't the thing that happened overnight. We just were working great for a while. And then at some point, I feel like we just, started seeing like wanting to take, the way we want to build the company in different ways. And also, I think the pivot was also a big part of it, because when we started working together, we started working on brand commerce that needed different skill sets. And then when we switched to Ethyca, that changed, the dynamic a bit as well. And then, over time, like I said, I like to believe that we were always able to have these, difficult conversations, very honest with each other. So it was no surprise to anyone. Like we just knew that, it just wasn't working out.
Which you and I both know, and we've dealt with founders before who they don't have that relationship of trust, and they might go 6-12 months having a horrible relationship with their co-founder, but none of them are willing to talk about it because they haven't built that trust between each other. And then it creates greater issues than having an adult conversation. Hey, this is what it is. Maybe we need to part ways. Maybe we need to, rethink the relationship dynamic. But I think a lot of founders end up avoiding it because it's too scary to address.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that we did it the best possible way, under the circumstances. Was I super excited about it? Obviously not. Did it take some time to process it that, I had to leave, my baby?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. And actually one of the investors that was one of the main investors in our company, and I still collaborate a lot with them today, which, is Eric from Founder Collective. Huge respect for him. He's one of those investors that I, look up to, and I feel like, is a great investor, but also just a great human being. And it's funny, as I was, on my way out and we sort of had, this like farewell conversation, he said to me like, I get it, because it's basically you're going through a divorce and the other co-founder gets to stay with the kids.
Yeah, I don't know what that's like, but I can imagine it's not easy. Yeah, and I left my first business after 4 or 5 years. Was very painful. Talked about going through therapy afterwards, and but yeah, ultimately we move on. You moved on.
You live and you learn. And
I don't know about for you, but for me at the time, being pushed out by some of my partners in my first business felt like the end of the world at the time. It turns out, in hindsight, it was like the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It opened up all of these new opportunities, new business relationships, learning new things. And while it was a painful, maybe 12, 24 months, ultimately ended up being a great thing for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And going back to Eric again, because that's one thing that he said to me as well at the time. He's like, it might feel, really, really difficult right now having to leave. But in the long term, hopefully you will be able to look back and say that, this was a blessing because it allowed you to open up and pursue other things that you were actually really much more passionate. Because again, if I'm very honest with myself, was I super happy the last couple of months that I was still at Ethyca? Now in hindsight, I can be honest with myself and probably not, and, Killian, I'm sure he felt that as well, that it just wasn't meant to work anymore at that point. And I think in the long term, it really, really sucked at first, but in the long term, I think it opened new opportunities and, BFF came out of it and what we're doing now. And I think with good conscience, I can look back and say, I wish nothing but the best, to Killian and the team. And I obviously am still a shareholder in the company. And I feel like we did it, the best way possible, given the circumstances.
So thank you for sharing that. You and I met 7 or 8 years ago. You were doing Elite Daily. I was doing Torcedores down here. Jacob Brody, our mutual friend, made the introduction. And you and I hadn't really spoken for probably 4 or 5 years, busy doing our own things. And I don't know if Jacob kind of gave me the heads up that you were starting to become more of a full-time investor. I don't know how we reconnected, but you and I reconnected, I want to say 2.5, 3 years ago now.
Yeah. It was like right around the time when I was leaving Ethyca.
Yeah, you were leaving Ethyca.
Yeah.
You were starting.
So it was like a little over 2 years ago now, I guess. Yeah.
And you had already been angel investing, venture investing for what, since 10 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. I started angel investing in 2012.
And tell me how you got into doing that.
I guess like most founders, you start seeing, your friends starting companies. You want to support them. You start writing small angel checks. Most of them go to zero.
Did you have this moment? I know I had this moment several times where I was a founder. I had other founder friends. They were starting great companies. I wasn't even thinking about investing at the time. And then these companies turn into, multi-billion-dollar unicorns. And I always think, man, I probably could have written an angel check if I had been an investor at the time.
Yeah, obviously you have, some of those missed opportunities, I guess everyone does. You just have to hope that your portfolio is, ends up being overall better than your anti-portfolio.
Yeah.
But one thing I also learned, from, my dad, who, he's a very prolific investor in his own sense, having been in private equity for, decades. So some of these, learnings that I have with me now, I learned a lot from him, where he was in those early days of angel investing, where I would still be super emotional about it and upset. And he would just always tell me like, look, this is part of the game. Like if you can't handle it, then better get out of the game. It's like, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, and just stay focused. And because if you're just going out there praying and getting really emotional about every win, but also about every loss, you're going to lose sight. So that's something that helped me a lot as well, about compartmentalizing those investments. And especially when it's with friends, when you make very clear that, because I feel the same way. It's like if you get people to invest in you and it doesn't work out, you feel guilty, you feel terrible. But at the same time, all these people that invest, they also have to understand that this is, part of the game. It comes with, that risk.
You're investing in early stage technology businesses. Most of them are going to fail. And as an investor, you shouldn't be putting all your eggs in one basket anyway.
Yeah, no, totally. And then over the years, I'd like to believe that, I've been sharpening my skills and become better at analyzing companies and sort of seeing if I believe that a company has a real potential. And the founders, if it's the right product market fit, founder market fit, do they believe about going about it the right way? Like a lot of these questions that you start asking yourself, and you just become better at crystallizing those thoughts as well, and also understanding why do you like something or why do you not like something. So yeah, I would say over the last 10 years, it's been a great learning experience and great journey. I've been fortunate enough to also invest in some very successful businesses. Yeah,
do you want to share any of those stories? I know you were one of the early investors in Plaid,
which of course that had to come up.
It's it's a great story. You met those guys, I believe, in an apartment. They were sleeping on your friend's couch or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't meet them at the apartment. I met them at the coffee shop. But William and Zach, they had just moved to New York. I always like to remind people, I consider Plaid a New York company, not a San Francisco company. They didn't move to San Francisco until after their Series A.
What year was this when they started?
2012.
Okay, so 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Was this one of your first investments?
Yeah, actually, yeah, it definitely is. Yeah.
So you meet these guys at a coffee shop through a mutual friend.
Yeah. So my close friend Amit Avner.
You were at Elite Daily at the time, I assume.
Yes, that's right. I was at Elite Daily. We were still working out of a co-working space. I remember very well because they came to meet me there when we met for the second time. And so, yeah, my friend Amit Avner, credit goes to him. He knew William and Zach. Don't know exactly how, but he knew them from before. They had moved to New York, were sleeping, on the couch in his apartment. And as they were ideating Plaid, Amit sort of got 5-6 close friends together, and we each ended up investing. And I believe it was the first something like 300 or 400K or something like that.
That was at I don't know if we can talk numbers here. That was at a very low valuation, especially in today's terms.
It was a sub 5 million valuation.
Sub 5 million. What was the last valuation that Plaid had?
the last valuation, don't quote me, but I want to say 13.4 billion.
Yeah.
I think it is.
And I heard it maybe even more in the private markets.
I mean,
who knows what the recent economic...
Yeah, pre-May, I know for a fact that there were secondary buyers willing to pay as high as 20 billion valuation.
So you came in at 4 or 5. It's now valued at 15 to 20. You did very well on
I
that.
mean, I would say it's less now. I would
10,
say it's
13.
I would say it's probably back to like around like
huge
the last
success.
valuation.
And one could say you got extremely lucky by meeting those guys.
100%.
But there's got to be a lesson there in terms of what makes a lot of the best investors great. You connecting the dots, looking backwards, those relationships that were built. You made the investment into their first round of funding. So what's the lesson there?
First, I would say absolutely agree. That was also just a lot of luck, knowing the right people, being the right time at the right place, and getting to know them. Because as we all say in the game, the first thing is you need to have the access.
Yeah. If
you don't have the access, you can't, miss the opportunity or make the investment. So that was luck there as well. I would love to claim to say that I have this like grand vision and knew that they're just going to be amazing founders. But in all honesty, I just thought that they obviously had just come out of Bain, first-time entrepreneurs. What really impressed me about them, and it's something that I look in general in founders, is they were super thoughtful. They were very thoughtful. They, even though it was still idea stage, they had clearly done their homework and what they believed was the opportunity in the market. And also very clear, they didn't pivot, but they definitely changed their business model as they were iterating, which, most early stage companies go through.
Yep.
So ironically, they had an idea, started executing towards that. We're hitting a bit of a roadblock. One of the issues was that in order to solve for that solution, they needed to be able to connect, to banks to get, people's information from, and ironically, they actually started with scraping in the early days before, they were the Plaid that you know today. Of course, the Bank of America's, Chase Banks and so on of the world were not willing to do, full integrations with them.
20 minutes with a startup.
Exactly. So they started with scraping, mirroring, your login flow and then scraping and you logging in and therefore they're getting the information. And then as they started scaling, they started realizing this is not scalable. This is an issue. And then start building integrations for financial institutions. And then the rest is history.
How far after the investment and the founding of the company did they really figure out the business model?
Good question. I mean, I would say you could say, the classic, you have product market fit and everything just starts growing super, super fast. It's been a while, so don't quote me on it. But I would say after the second or the third year, that's when things really started taking off, I want to say.
Yeah, startups, these things take a long time to figure out. And when you look at a lot of the big success stories, often the founder was working or ideating on the idea before the company was even started for several years.
I mean, that's what we're saying, like the overnight successes.
Yeah.
Like if you go back and look at the media, I'm sure people were writing about Plaid being the overnight success.
Yeah.
Suddenly growing so fast and whatnot, which is obviously not the case. But to go back to the very first question that you were saying as we were starting about Plaid is that, what I look for is being the thoughtful founders that seem well-informed and also admit when they don't know something. Like I remember having conversations with them and just really generally enjoying learning from them and getting the answers from them. And them also being honest when they didn't have an answer, but then they would come back really quickly within 24 hours with either a document or a write-up or something, being like, oh, we looked into it. This is what we think the right answer is. So that's definitely something that I look in founders, people who are humble, who are hungry, and most importantly, who are honest about what they know and what they don't. Because look, we all know that you don't have all the answers in the early days. It's an iteration process and you need to figure it out as you go.
Yeah, and most founders, I've been guilty of this in the past. You want to pretend that you have it all figured out, especially when you're talking to an investor. You're super insecure about that relationship that you have with the investor. And so you want to put on a show that, yeah, I have all of the answers. And that's just not the reality, is it?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've done the same at both, at Elite Daily and Brand Commerce and Ethyca. I've definitely found myself at times where I caught myself trying to bullshit. But I think with the years and with the experience, I tried to remind myself and try to stop it and say, actually, good question. I don't know the answer. Let me get back to you. Because again, investors, they do this for a living and they can also smell bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's a big red flag if you can smell bullshit in a founder. And I think it comes back to just trying to be transparent. And I also say every time you meet an investor as a founder, the first time, second, third time, it's a data point. So it's totally normal that the very first time you meet, it's just a data point. Of course you want to knock it out of the park. Of course you want to walk out of the meeting and feeling like you were able to answer all the questions. You came out looking like, whatever space you are going after, that you know everything inside out, all the competitors and everything, Of course you want that, but look, we're all humans. Nobody's perfect. So I think you go in, you do your best. And then if it wasn't a good day, then be honest about it and try to learn from that. And then hopefully you get a second shot, with the founder where you can show that you just had a bad day.
Yeah.
But every time you speak to an investor, it's a data point. And that also gets me to another point as well. So a lot of the founders forget how important it is to, once you have the investors and they invested, to keep building that relationship. Just because the money's in the bank doesn't mean that now you can go back to building your business and completely forget about your investors. One thing that I learned, from one of my mentors as well is treat your investors like your insurance policy. Because when all goes to shit, the last people that hopefully you can still rely on are your investors. And you want them to be emotionally invested in your business when shit hits the fan. Because it's not an if, it's a when.
Yeah.
It undoubtedly always happens. And fortunately, I had good mentors. And also from my banking days, I learned, the importance of having processes in place and good reporting. It doesn't have to be a novel every time you send out a monthly or quarterly report. It can just be a good write-up and attach your financials. Like, it's so funny how so many founders that I speak to don't have proper financials from day zero. Like, as my dad always says, until you have proper financials, it's a hobby, not a company. And I believe that.
Yeah. How can founders be proactive in building that relationship with their investors?
I would say cadence, whatever works for you, be it monthly or quarterly reports, so that you don't always only reach out if you have something amazing to tell or something terrible. Just have this cadence of updates. And also, you take advantage of your investors, like ask them for help and things. Like I always say in your monthly, updates, maybe do, a quick, reminder of what your business does, who you are. But then the second thing should be the asks, just like lead with that. So even the laziest investors, hopefully they'll see that. And if you make it really simple with simple bullet points of clear asks, hopefully your investors are, emotionally invested enough that if they can help you with a quick intro or answer a question that you have, hopefully they'll do it.
Yeah, and you can do this before the investment's actually made too. You and I have been spending time with a founder recently who uses investors a lot to get introductions to other people, to learn from them, to learn from their networks. And this is a company we haven't even invested in yet.
Yeah. I mean, he's also a repeat founder and he's smart.
Yeah.
It's also getting to know each other and testing each other. As much as we're diligencing founders, that founders should be diligencing investors.
Yeah, this is a 10-year relationship if everything goes well. So it's a business partnership. This is not hey, nice to meet you, write me a check tomorrow.
And I highly, highly encourage any founder to do the same. Go diligence the investors as well. Go find out other companies they invested in. And importantly, try to find out companies they invested in that didn't work out, because success stories have many fathers. Like if you go and ask all, investors of Nubank, how, go ask David Veles how he feels about investors, he'll probably tell you about all of them. Oh yeah, they were great, because he always had good, encounters with them because he's a rocket ship.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how, and I've seen it myself in my angel portfolio now as a full-time investor. The companies, that are doing the best, that I guess subconsciously we would like to spend more time with, you don't, because they don't need you. They don't need your help.
Yeah.
It's usually, the companies that are struggling that you spend the most time with. And I feel like that's, again, where the difference comes between good and great investors.
Yeah. How do you then allocate your time when theoretically most of your returns are going to come through startups where you don't have to spend that much time with them, and where you're not seeing a ton of returns? That's maybe where you're spending most of your time in that case.
Yeah, look, when you make an investment, like you were just saying before, it's a relationship. When you're going through a rough patch in your relationship or your marriage, your reaction is neither to just drop it and walk away. If it's meaningful, then you put in the effort and you work on it. And as we were just saying before, companies go through ups and downs. And a lot of these success stories, like I have an investment that I made that, they were struggling. We sort of wrote it off internally because I always tried to have a good cadence internally as well. When you're honest with yourself, is that company actually still a 6x return, or is it really not? Should you write it off? How are they doing? Mm-hmm. I always say I rather under promise over deliver. And it was one of those companies that were going through a serious rough patch. Admittedly, we were not able to help as much as we would have liked to. But I always tried to stay close, would check in with the founders and just let them know, hey, we're here. And they ended up selling, about now 12, 18 months ago, and ended up turning into a nice 6x return.
Awesome.
So companies go through ups and downs. And I think the founders will remember, who stuck by them through the shitty times, not who called them up, to congratulate them on the next big round or closed deal. And we're like, oh, but please remember me, to give me an allocation for the next round.
Yep. Let's talk BFF. Where did the idea for starting a venture firm come from?
As I was saying at the very beginning, I think it was just a natural progression, an evolution of both of our careers, I like to believe. Starting as an operator, then joining my friends at Vast Ventures for a little over a year, who I am really thankful for them, as they,
Doug and Anik, great guys.
Yeah, Doug and Anik, they took me in, as I was going through this soul searching after,
They were an investor in your previous company.
Yes, they were investors in Elite Daily and also in Ethyca. I always joke, I always say I made them money with the first one, I'm making them money on paper with the second one. But they were, great friends. Took me in as their third partner as I was, getting, post Ethyca. And they, I'm really thankful for that. They had just raised their fourth fund, and they had never made investments in Latin America. And I made my first angel investment in Latin America in 2019 through my cousins who introduced me to early Rappi employees. Mm. So when I joined VAS, I said, look, super thankful for the opportunity, but I'm really bullish on Latin America. I would love to pursue that more. To their credit, they said, great. If you want to build a thesis, introduce us and the LPs, to the opportunity, let's go for it. So the year plus that I was at Vast Ventures, of the 7 deals that I made, 6 ended up being in Latin America. And
so quickly becoming a Latin America fund?
No. Because we obviously had other investments they were making. It was still the minority, but it just became very clear that I want to focus more on Latin America. And I totally understood why Vast Ventures can only support that pursue so much. So we mutually agreed, with their support, that I was leaving and I was starting my own fund, being not fully, but the vast majority being focused in Latin America.
What do you see in Latin America today?
Why am I excited?
Why are you excited about LATAM?
It's funny, having grown up in Europe, I feel like I've seen this movie play out already over the last 15 years. When about 15 plus years ago, that first wave of the ecosystem in Europe with copycats, I feel like similar that happened here. And then you saw the second wave.
I think it happened with the same folks from Europe.
Oh, you mean Rocket Internet?
Yeah, Rocket, the Samware brothers, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they had an influence here.
And then everybody else was doing it here as well.
But I definitely wouldn't give them the credit as they had in Germany. Or
when I got here 10 years ago, 99% of the startups were copycats from Europe or the US or wherever they were copying.
No, exactly. And I guess it's a natural evolution of the ecosystem. And so when I look at that, I can see, okay, now Latin America is at this really interesting inflection point where, thanks to local players, like Monashis and others, they've built that foundation and went through the dark ages.
Yeah, when I got here, Monashis was basically like the only venture investor around. It was Fabio and Eric and the other guys, Marcelo and the team over there. But they were like the solo venture capital firm here for a while.
Yeah, and thanks to them for going through the dark ages and nurturing the first wave of founders that brought great companies. And I feel like now is the beginning of the second wave that obviously we've seen over the last 2 years, a big catalyst that funding in Latin America grew at an exponential rate. But at the end of the day, it's still nothing compared to the US or Europe. I mean, when you look at I forget what it is, but I think it's like technologies, I think between 55 and 60% contributor in GDP in the US versus here in Latin America, I think it's now 2.5% or maybe 3%.
Yeah.
Huge difference. And that just shows me the huge opportunity for value creation that still lands here. And also with, better fundamental trends. You have a lot of people that were trained coming out of the first couple of success stories of the companies, starting their own companies now. So talent still scarce, but nowhere near as scarce as it was a couple of years ago here.
Absolutely.
You have well-educated and trained people who, that was always the story. Like, the people who had access to the US would always go to the US and go to MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and whatnot, then go work for Palantir, Google, Facebook, and whatnot. But now you're seeing more and more of these talents coming back to Latin America to either join companies or start their own companies because they see it as a real opportunity rather than staying in the US. So I think that's really exciting. I think a lot of the topics that you hear about people, especially, call it US investors who are interested in Latin America, are still a bit nervous. A lot of the questions that I get is about FX, for example, FX risk. What I would say to that is like, of course, there is FX risk to a certain degree. But when you look at historically over the last decade plus, there was even a bigger volatility risk. And look at the value creation of companies that were able to be created over that period of time. So I would say, yes, there is FX risk, but compared to the last decade, it's diminished. And then you have a lot of what that I get, is like regulatory risk. And when I speak, especially with Americans, when it comes to fintech, I love, calling them out that actually Brazil in certain, forms when it comes to financial infrastructure is actually more advanced than the US.
More risk in the US?
No, more advanced. Just because if you think about BICS, for example.
No, in the US, there's more risk.
Oh, in the US.
Regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, I wouldn't say more risk, but I just like to remind people not from the region that, this area, these countries here are more sophisticated than, you like to think.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a huge push, especially in Brazil, with the open banking, regulations, with PICS, and just all of these, things that have been happening in the recent years, have really been a great catalyst for innovation. Like, for example, the company we were speaking with earlier this morning, they are definitely taking advantage of a lot of these fast, changes. So what's the
thesis for BFF?
So the thesis for BFF, as we were looking, of course, why are we really excited in the region and what we think that still, has room for more funds and specifically what we're investing in. But then also, how can we help founders in a way that we believe that we have an edge towards others? that's how we derived our thesis. So really where we landed is when we started speaking with some of our already existing portfolio founders, either through angel investments or investments I did at Vast. The feedback kept being the same. They kept saying how they really appreciated working with us. And because in my case, being former two-time founder, in your case, being a founder, that they always felt that it was easy to speak with us, that they felt comfortable and imminently connected to us, being able to ask us any questions around the business, if they're struggling with something, and more importantly, not just tactical or business-related questions, but also interpersonal issue relations questions. But at the same time, we have built multiple businesses, therefore have gone through, from scratch, building an operations team, building a sales team, having think about negotiating your initial contracts, how you think about your ideal customer profile, then after going to it, go-to-market strategy. So a lot of these things that we've learned, by doing many mistakes ourselves, is something that we realized that founders really appreciate. Therefore comes the positioning, again, by founders for founders, really being focused pre-seed and seed, because we feel that that's where we can really bring the most help. Mm-hmm. And then sector-wise, in a similar vein, also for ourselves, being honest what we know and what we don't know. Mm-hmm. What we know best, having built previously, is B2B SaaS, fintech, and infrastructure, meaning any type of company that is a consumer enabler. Not to be confused with a consumer company. We do not invest in consumer companies, but we invest into ERP, CRMs, data infrastructure providers, like anything that a consumer company would use, or a software that they would use to run their business.
Great. How do you like to collaborate with other investors in the ecosystem?
First of all, being super open and transparent. I truly believe that this is a team sport. I think that the more collaborative we are with other players in the ecosystem, the more everybody's going to win. And I remember a lot from New York. I know everybody always thinks of New York as this big, established, global city. But when it comes to the tech ecosystem, in 2008-9, after the first .com boom, it was really just starting to grow again because Silicon Valley was the clear dominator. Mm-hmm. Tech was a very small player in New York compared, to the financial industry, the fashion industry, media, and so on. So I remember those days really well, and very fond of them, where you literally had like one or two co-working spaces, and you would know that you would run into everyone in one of those. And among founders and also investors, everybody was very collaborative, helping each other out with introductions. And when I first started coming into the ecosystem here in Latin America, 2.5+ years ago, it felt very much the same. And I love that. Like everybody generally wants
everyone's kind of on the
win.
same team here.
Yeah, like everybody generally wants everybody else to win. Mm-hmm. And I still feel that. And I know eventually, I guess it will start wearing off as it becomes more competitive. But for now, I'm really enjoying this. And that's why I really enjoy working with local founders, of course, but also local co-investors that we're very friendly with across Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Chile.
What do you look for in a co-investor?
The first thing I would say is, are we aligned in the way we think about building businesses, how we want to help founders? And again, everybody throws out like this for being founder friendly, but what does it really mean? I would say I tend to align myself more with investors that like to be hands-on, but that are smart enough to know when to offer help and when to trust the founders. Mm-hmm. Just being able to build these strong relationships with the founders. And then, of course, are they subject matter experts? Are they investors who truly understand, the sectors that we're investing in as well, and we can collaborate and learn from each other? Because I will definitely not claim to know more about, the financial ecosystem in Brazil than a Marcelo Lima from Monashis, for example. But I love having conversations with him and speaking about how he's seeing, the trends in Brazil and in the region in general, and then me trying to bring my point of view, from my learnings in the US, for example, or what I've been seeing here. So these are the kind of conversations that I really appreciate having with other people that I consider much smarter than me. I always want to be the dumbest person in the room.
Me too. And then back to the name BFF, by founders for founders. What would you say is like the typical scenario when a founder calls you up and is looking for help? Probably having a horrible day. They call up Miguel. What are they asking for?
I've had all sorts of questions. I've had founders call, especially the recent months, that fundraising has been a real struggle and getting tough. Which, by the way, I think is good. Of course, it sounds self-serving being an investor, but we're feeling it as well. We have LPs too that we need to fundraise from, so it definitely goes both ways. But I think it was a necessary correction in the market, bringing, and again, people say like, oh, let's bring it back to foundation and to thinking to fundamentals and thinking bottom line focused. I do like to believe that in our portfolio, we did a good job pre-selecting already, that a lot of these founders have always been thoughtful operators. So I haven't really had any conversations recently with founders that they're still burning through their cash and don't really want to see the reality. But those are conversations, having people call and say, look, having a really tough fundraising, we're only got to 40% of our goal. What should we do? Should we start thinking about downsizing our team, extending runway? Like these kind of conversations where, you can just give them the quick tactical answers. But I think more important is to first ask them, like, how are they doing? Yeah. If they're in a relationship, how's the relationship going? Has it started being affecting their personal life? Reminding them that it's happening to everyone. They're not alone in this. And one thing that I actually learned from my wife, since she's like a psychologist, when someone comes with you from being at a very, and she actually showed me like this visual cartoon, which is really funny. It's like with this elephant that is like at the very bottom of a tall room. And then the other people or the smiley people are on top of it. And it's kind of the same, like, when that person comes to you, they're all the way at the bottom. You being at the top there, you just telling them like, oh, everything's going to be fine. Don't worry. Like, let's just go have a drink and whatnot. That's the worst thing you can do. It's going to make them feel worse. Because it's going to make them feel even more alone. You have to level with them, come down the ladder and just be there with them and make them realize that they're not alone and you're there with them, and just connect with them in that way and ask them how are they doing? How can you be helpful? And just also let them know that you're feeling the pain with them.
You're not judging them.
And you're not judging them. And then once you sort of went through that and you get, to connect with them and make them feel better, I feel then you can start being like, okay, now let's try and help you. Let's try figure out how we can help you resolve that. And when you did a good job, more often than not, you hopefully get a text message from the founder a couple of hours later or days later saying like, hey, thanks so much. This was an awesome conversation and it gave me energy and this is what we did.
Yeah. The founder journey is lonely. And if you don't have supportive friends, supportive investors and advisors in your corner that you can call and have those real raw conversations with, like every day as a founder sucks. And so, having investors in your corner who are willing to show you empathy and not immediately judge you and listen to you and try and understand your emotional state, it's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I want us to stand for. I hate this like, oh, we're so founder friendly. I want us to stand for being, the early stage funds that you can come to us, you can ideate with us, we can hopefully invest in your pre-seed and then in your seed and truly help you from 0 to 1 with all the shit that happens throughout the journey.
Amazing. Miguel, thanks so much for coming. Welcome to Latin America. Welcome to Brazil. Hope to see you here often, and I know I will. So thank you.